Alrighty, I'm going to take a break and talk about domestic American politics, which I do my best to keep to a minimum. But last night, I think, was a significant event, and I think it was a positive event. And that, of course, I'm referring to were the series of primary elections that took place last night across multiple states. But I'm really interested in what happened in Arizona in the Republican Senate and governor or gubernatorial primaries. Now, yes, if you want to make last night about Trump, you can say, well, all of the Trump-endorsed candidates won in all the, the contested primaries across all the different states. You had Kansas, Missouri, Arizona, I just said, Michigan. And at least all the prominent ones, there might have been little races here or there, maybe, I don't know. I wasn't following most of them. But from what I understand, all the ones where there was a lot of contention and Trump made an endorsement, the guy that he endorsed won. Including in Missouri where he endorsed two people. I guess kind of hedging his bets a little. And then the other big story was out of Kansas where they voted not to amend the Kansas Constitution to affirmatively say that you don't have a constitutional right to abortion. And that's a big story, but it's a different story from what I want to talk about with Arizona. Steve Deace covered the Kansas situation well. You can find his show on YouTube and iTunes, I'm sure, or at The Blaze. He talked about it plenty. I don't need to say anything about that. If you want to listen, go talk about Kansas, you can go find Steve Deace. But as far as Arizona is concerned, what to me was significant is that not only are we going to have a very outspoken and I don't want to say total outsider because Blake Masters he's a pretty rich guy. I mean, I don't trust him 100%. He's not an all-star in that sense, as far as I'm concerned. He's not ideal, but when we're talking about trying to elect people to the U.S. Senate or wherever, it's not an ideal situation to begin with. I mean, our whole system is totally just fucked up beyond all repair. But with that said, I think that Blake Masters is somebody who will be a breath of fresh air in the U.S. Senate. He will bring the energy which you have in some members of the U.S. House of Representatives on the Republican side into the Senate. Senate Republicans across the spectrum have always been more watered down than House Republicans. The most right-wing U.S. Senator was never as right-wing or as extreme, if you want to say, in temperament, in policy, in the way that they conduct themselves as the most right-wing member of the U.S. House. And it's less about policy, although policy is very important, obviously, and Blake Masters, on the stuff that is most important to me, I think is pretty good. He had the right instincts on the Ukraine war, for one thing. He had no problem coming out and saying that we had no role getting involved in Ukraine. The same, of course, cannot be said for anyone else who was running for U.S. Senate in the state of Arizona. And you might say, hey, would Blake Masters be the first, anti-war Republican ever elected to the U.S. Senate? Well, certainly not in the history of the Senate, no. I mean, there's been many in the past. But currently, you would point to maybe, Rand Paul. You'd say, well, gee, he's Ron Paul's son. I mean, how could you be better than him on wars? And I will admit, Rand Paul is the best guy in the Senate. He's the best senator right now, especially on foreign policy stuff. But at the end of the day, he is still beholden to Mitch McConnell. His temperament is tempered in the U.S. Senate. Rand Paul is not Ron Paul. He will never be the firebrand that Ron Paul was. He does not have his father's temperament. He is not as willing to burn bridges with his fellow Republicans. And I think Blake Masters represents an attitude towards Washington which is closer to that of Ron Paul, even though, on other policies, he's further away. That's why I said I'm not focusing so much on policies. I'm focusing on his attitude towards the establishment, which even that deserves an asterisk, because I don't fully trust Blake Masters, since he is, someone out of the Peter Thiel orbit. I've always been very suspicious of Peter Thiel. And so we'll see. Blake Masters might hit a wall as far as, where he's willing to fight and how useful he is. But we'll just have to see where that wall is. We'll have to see where he gets off the off the train, or we'll see how long of a leash Peter Thiel has fastened to him. But overall, I think he would be coming into the Senate with an attitude more akin to the more recently elected firebrands in the U.S. House, like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Matt Gaetz or Lauren Boebert. None of whom, other than maybe Matt Gaetz, do I really have a love for their politics and think that they're just so smart on everything. Even Matt Gaetz isn't brilliant, but I think generally speaking, whenever I've heard Matt Gaetz just ad lib on an issue, he's usually right. Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Lauren Boebert, they can be kind of hit or miss, but they have decent enough instincts, and they certainly know who the bad guys are. They know who they're supposed to be opposed to, and so if they find out, hey, X person is on this side of an issue, they'll instinctively jump to the other side. And I think that's the kind of person that you have when in Blake Masters. And so I think he's a fighter. I'll go out on a limb for that. I think he's more of a fighter than Rand Paul. Rand Paul was always, just again, it's a matter of his personality. He was somebody who tried to build bridges while also staking out, his position. He would filibuster for a little while and say, hey, we shouldn't be doing this. But at the end of the day, he'd sit down and, business would carry on with or without Rand Paul's support. And, Mike Lee, even less so than Rand Paul. He's even less confrontational, which is why, despite the fact that Mike Lee is one of the most conservative men in the Senate, more conservative than, let's say, Ted Cruz, even though, I know that the online Trump base, of the online, I guess you call them e-populists, or I don't want to call them Populism Inc. I know a lot of them, the hardcore Trump people, they can't stand Mike Lee. I have a much more nuanced view of him. I think he's generally a pretty good guy. You just have to understand who he is. And he does not have the temperament of someone who is particularly aggressive. And that's why, despite, his actual policy positions being among the most conservative in the Senate, he is personally quite popular amongst his fellow senators. He's generally very well liked, unlike, let's say, a Ted Cruz, who, in my opinion, is less conservative than Mike Lee, but significantly less popular amongst the other senators. And I'm not saying that you want to be popular amongst other senators. In fact, I think that you should be unpopular. And I think that Blake Masters will probably be quite unpopular. At least that's what I hope, based on what I've seen of him so far. I think that he's someone who, since he is independently wealthy, he does have that wiggle room to go out on limbs and say, you know what, I'm going to stake out this position and I ain't moving. He can self-fund his own campaigns. Unlike, let's say, a Rand Paul, who's, as I've said, very much beholden to Mitch McConnell. And so I think him and also J.D. Vance, while they are not people who, if we sat down and we just went over issue by issue, do I line up with them 100% on everything? No. I'm sure I have plenty of policy disagreements with them, but the general direction, the general understanding of what time is it in America? What's the situation we're dealing with? And two, who are our enemies? Who are the bad guys? I think on those questions, we generally line up, and that's at this moment, at this time, this crucial time in the history of the country, I think that's what's most important. Ideally, every senator and congressman would pretty much be Thomas Massie. I think he's the perfect blend. as far as, actual positions as well as attitude. I think that Thomas Massie is sufficiently combative. He's hated by a lot of the right people. Even Donald Trump said that Thomas Massie was like the worst man in America because he wouldn't vote for the CARES Act. Who got the last laugh on that one? So I want this style of politics to grow. I want more people like this involved in politics. This, I think, is what we need at this time. And Kari Lake, who, even though we're 10 minutes in now, I think is the more important win of the night, even though she didn't win by as big of a margin. I am very excited for the leadership of Kari Lake because I think she is the first DeSantis-esque, overtly DeSantis-esque governor to potentially be elected, in a state that isn't Florida. And I think that people on the right, across the right spectrum, whether they be, well, I won't get into it, but generally people across the right, I'll leave it at that, look at the DeSantis administration as a tremendous success, especially considering that we in Florida were typically considered to be about a 50-50 swing state, a purple state for the longest time, for decades. I mean, even, Florida was a swing state in the 1968 election. And that was a three-way race. Even back then, even when there were three candidates in the race, we were still a swing state. They didn't know, who, okay, is it going to be, it could go to Nixon, it could go to, oh my gosh, what was his name? Wallace, I almost said Roberts. Wallace or Hubert Humphrey, that was the Democrat. So, we're used to, governors are in office, they have to play it down the middle. Oh, you can't upset the moderates because you need the moderates to win because, there's not enough conservatives and all this nonsense. And DeSantis took his position, he leveraged it in order to change the reality of politics in this state. He has used his office to make Florida a more conservative state, culturally and politically. And because of that, because the state is inherently now more conservative than it was when he took office in 2018, and of course Trump deserves a ton of credit for this as well, because Trump started the shift in voting patterns. A lot of different demographics and classes of people have become aligned more with the right now than they ever were in the past. This has allowed us to transition into being going from a down the middle centrist state to an overt right-wing state. And Kari Lake is very openly looking to import the model of Ron DeSantis and his leadership and do the same things and have the goal of achieving the same results in Arizona, a state which used to be politically a deep red state in that they always voted Republican. Now that's changing. Of course, Biden officially was the first Democrat to win Arizona since Bill Clinton. But even before 2020, if you look at the kind of people that Arizona elected, it was very clear that Arizona politically was not very conservative. Yes, you had governors like Jan Brewer who were very tough on the border, but look at their two senators. It was Jeff Flake and John McCain. Yeah, they also had Barry Goldwater in the past, but Barry Goldwater hadn't been in the U.S. Senate since the 1980s. Since then, it was John McCain and John McCain-style politics that ran the show in Arizona. And Kari Lake, like DeSantis in Florida, I think has the opportunity to change the facts on the ground. Remember, who was the big, successful Florida governor before DeSantis that was well known throughout the country? It was Jeb Bush. And now Ron DeSantis is far more famous than Jeb Bush ever could have been. And no, contrary to popular beliefs, Jeb Bush wasn't just considered, successful because he was the president's brother. Independently, at the time in Florida, I remember, he was considered to be a competent governor and was considered to have accomplishments. Now, whether or not, we would be happy about them, and, he certainly wasn't, Mr. Conservative or something like that. But nevertheless, he was considered, generally speaking, to be successful. DeSantis, however, has achieved success by redefining what success means in this state. And I think Kari Lake has the power to do the same in Arizona, which is much more important than whatever Blake Masters will accomplish in the Senate. Governors and sheriffs are the most important elected officials in the United States. If you've got a good governor and a good sheriff, no matter what happens, you're generally going to be all right relative to the rest of the country. So I look forward to Kari Lake if she's able to pull it off in the general election, which I sincerely hope she does. I look forward to her reforming the electoral system in Arizona so that they can actually count all the votes on election night. It's ridiculous. I woke up this morning and I checked the primary race or whatever, and it still said 78% reporting. It's inexcusable. I mean, it's just, we in Florida, we had one bad election in 2000 and then got our acts together after that. Again, Jeb Bush was part of that. Jeb Bush deserves credit for that, for all his faults and the fact that, we might not like him these days. That is a part of his legacy, is the electoral system running smoothly in Florida. And there were a couple holdouts like Palm Beach and Broward, which DeSantis finally cleaned up after he got into office. But we had one bad election in this state, fixed everything, and we're still known as, we're the state with, third world, ridiculous stolen elections. Whereas in reality, you've got all these other states that have for multiple times, multiple election cycles, keep screwing up, if you want to think of it as an accident, screwing up their elections, and are the ones that really look like maybe not quite tin pot dictatorships, but not entirely democratic developing countries. Let's put it that way. And Arizona, I think, is one of them. I mean, they ran out of paper ballots. How do you run out of ballots on election day? And that was in Pinal County, I believe. So, with all that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.